My name is Nick Zerwas. I'm an assistant principal here at Del Oro, and I'm only going to talk to you for about 2 minutes just to show you a few statistics from a recent survey we took, and then to introduce one of our guest speakers for tonight. So, here we go. We, every year, every high school in California takes what's called the California Healthy Kids Survey. 9th graders and 11th graders take that survey every year. And we do it towards the beginning of the year. So here at Del Oro, we do it in October. So really, you're getting statistics so early in the year that it's kind of measuring 8th grade and 10th grade a little bit, but, you know, because at that point, the students are brand new 9th graders or brand new 10th graders, or I'm sorry, 11th graders. So we do ours here in the 9th grade. We do it in the cardio health or PE classes. In the 11th grade, we do it in English or US history classes. So we get a pretty wide range of our students. You can see we had 790 responses. They're all anonymous, so we kind of tell students this is important. We get real data, but we can't attach it to you at all, so we try to get a little more honesty that way. We had a high percentage of our 9th graders, 91% of our 9th graders and 82% of our 11th graders complete the survey. And it asks 130 questions, and it tries to measure lots of different things that have to do with student health. So some of those things have to do with substance abuse, others have to do with other mental health indicators, some demographic questions to kind of get a sense for, you know, who our population is. We can then compare that data we get here to data from our district and then data from across the state. I want to show you 3 slides. Just today, just looking at substance abuse stuff because we're talking about addictive behaviors. So I think this will give you a little bit of context of what we, you know, kind of the self-reported student numbers here. This is a graph that shows you the last 3 years. So I'll do a little bit of interpretation here. The blue lines are 2 years ago. The red lines are last year. And then the orange or yellow lines are this year. So you can kind of see some trends, and this is just 9th graders. So it's not the same students every time. It's our current 11th grade, 10th grade, and 9th grade students that they answered in their 9th grade year. And this is the question that they answered to get this data here was, have you ever used in your life, have you ever used any of these substances? And so they answered on alcohol, marijuana, tobacco. What it doesn't say there is whole cigarette. Have you ever, you know, smoked a whole cigarette? Vaping, inhalants, cocaine, methamphetamines, ecstasy, LSD, and then prescription drugs. So what you can see when you look at this is that some of our numbers are relatively high, you know, higher than you would hope. We've got 15% of our freshmen saying they've used alcohol, but you don't really see a trend that it's going up each year, except with vaping. You notice that slightly upward trend right there. So you can see that over the last 3 years, the self-reported vaping for 9th graders has gone up. When you look at the 11th grade numbers, you can see a more interesting or shocking trend that the numbers are going up for alcohol, marijuana, and vaping. So this is our 11th grade students. And then I think the most interesting or thing that is helping us here at Del Oro have some targeted interventions with some of our student groups is to see when you place the 9th grade numbers, which are the small stacks, next to the 11th grade numbers, which are the large stacks, you can see that we have a huge jump, which you would expect, but a huge jump. So we have lots and lots of our students who are using these substances for the first time between their 9th grade year, between October of their 9th grade year and October of their 11th grade year. So when they're a freshman or sophomore student, really. So this is helping us at Del Oro kind of frame some of the conversations we're having here and ways that we have targeted interventions with some of our students, student groups, and looking specifically at how do we help students find other ways to be healthy and engaged and avoid some of these substances. That's all for me. What I want to do tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing a woman named Emma McManus. And she is with a organization called, am I saying this right, Vantage? Yes, Vantage. And she is here to talk to us a little bit about eating disorders, which kind of fits in that addictive behavior category. And so here she is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. So let's see, I have the pleasure of joining Amy tonight. I kind of got in as an add-in. We were going to do them separately, but it's nice to be able to do them together. And as you'll see, there's a lot of crossover, especially in the brain connections. So I treat all eating disorders. Typically, some of my people do have substance use disorders. However, it's a secondary diagnosis to the eating disorder. So I'm inundated in this stuff. I work in Midtown. If I can be helpful, please stop me as we go through and let me know if there's something you have questions. That's just fine. So anyone have much experience with eating disorders where they've had a lot of, I don't know that it's something everybody talks about as much as addiction, but it can be, I think, really important in the high school population. So we'll just kind of go over a little bit here. And so I would say one of the big things is that substance use disorders are chronic, not unlike eating disorders. There's also multiple relapses in both diagnoses. And I think the brain function and behavior are definitely affected. Both disorders are understood through a biopsychosocial model, and kind of what that means is to break it down into three parts. The bio would be there's a biological component, which would be genetics. In the case of eating disorders, many of them have a parent, a grandparent, somebody who's had either an eating disorder or more commonly an addictive disorder like substance use. So that's really important to realize that is a big component. And when they say psycho means the person's individual psychology, their makeup, how they see the world, kind of their perception of the world, as well as their personality. Personality is a big part of the development of an eating disorder. And then the social would be probably what a lot of parents are concerned about, this idea of what are our kids exposed to, what's on social media. You can't get away from that. Even as adults, we are inundated by that. So let me tell you a little bit about this idea of why do people develop eating disorders. A lot of people ask this. There's really no etiology. There's no one reason people develop it. It's much better understood with this kind of triad of factors that come together. Now, interestingly enough, the genetic component only contributes to about 30 to 40% of why people actually develop it. The bigger percentage is the psychosocial piece, so the person's personality and then what they're exposed to. So even more reason, I think, to be aware of what's going on and what kids are presented with. Okay, so then, and this is huge, this next bullet point here. There's pretty much hands down 50% of those with an eating disorder also have drug and alcohol problems, whether they be post, in the past or currently. So that's huge. So I think it's really not a good idea to treat one without the other. They're best treated together, actually, simultaneously. Interestingly enough, we don't have anywhere pretty much nationwide that treats both. So typically, if somebody's in a substance use disorder program, somebody like me would come in and kind of augment treatment that way too, because I don't know why, but they're not combined. So this is kind of a little bit about addictive behaviors, and what we talk about here is how common they are and how there's a lot of crossover in the clinical. So this could be a lot of people with eating disorders also have comorbid anxiety, depression, and or something to do with drug use or alcohol. So when you think about that's kind of big, and I think this last line's pretty prevalent. Substance abuse disorders often happen in the same year as the eating disorder development, or the eating disorder came first. So what we see in the clinical realm is that somebody who might be sober, let's say they're an adult and they're sober 10 years, you have them stop binge purging and then all of a sudden they're drinking again. So that's really common. So I think that's important to know. Let's see, risk factors. It's a pretty big list here. And as you can see, brain chemistry is a big one, and we'll talk more about that. Family history, that would mean both what do kids have genetically predisposition, and also what are they exposed to. I mean, our kids absorb a lot of what they see in the household. Family history is also interesting because this could be excessive diet talk or not eating certain food groups. And I think that people don't realize what an impact that has, because that's a huge element of this as well. Low self-esteem also is seen in substance use disorders, depression, anxiety, social pressures. Compulsive behavior, this doesn't have to be full-blown OCD, but just so you know, I think it's about 14% of those with anorexia also have OCD. So those kids that are obsessional, perfectionistic, they're kind of lined up in the right kind of perfect storm to develop something like an eating disorder. Social anxiety, social isolation, and then risk of suicide is high. And if you looked at this and you didn't see this top sentence, you'd see most of these are happening in substance use disorders too. Okay, so this is a little bit, I broke this down for you, but this is essentially the biopsychosocial model. It's how we understand why it happens with multiple etiology. And I think it's important to say that families don't cause eating disorders. I think everybody's really relieved when they hear that, especially when they bring their child into treatment, and it's just not the case. You know, what we say, what we speak about, what we value obviously affects our kids, but not in a way of causation by any means. So that's important. That was kind of an old adage. So prevalence rates, so this is a lot of these you may know. I think that second bullet is the most striking of it, that 50% of those with an eating disorder also are abusing drugs and alcohol. And in the population that you would all have with your high school kiddos, this is definitely the case, probably actively doing it at the same time if they were engaging. 14% of those with eating disorders, specifically anorexia, will have a substance use disorder. And these are kind of the common ones. Those that are trying to be thin obviously would do things like methamphetamines, cocaine, believe it or not, pretty common. Diuretics, I mean, we don't think of that, but obviously they can be misused. Heroin can be a big one, tobacco. You know, I probably should have put up here marijuana because that's, I would say, oh my goodness, maybe 80% of my patients are also smoking. So that's important. I forgot to put that in. Many of them use stimulants like amphetamines for weight loss. And then this probably isn't as common in your kids, but binge eating disorder is the #1 eating disorder, most common. It just made its way into mental health like maybe 3 years ago. So what you had is you had a lot of people that were really obese and they were in the medical community being told to lose weight. But what was forgotten that really it is a psychological condition for most people. And therefore, these people that are on the overeating side, bulimia as well, but specifically binge eating disorder is really highly correlated with alcohol use or abuse. So I think that's important. It may not be as prevalent. You're probably going to see more things like bulimia or anorexia in the high school populations. This is scary, this statistic, I think. You know, those with anorexia, 56% more likely to commit suicide than non-sufferers. I would say the important thing there that people don't realize, I think we hear a lot about depression and anxiety, thankfully. There's a lot of good media out there and coverage discussing it. But the top deadliest psych condition is actually anorexia. More so than depression. More people die of anorexia than they do depression. So I think that's important. It's typically not suicide with this, that's more bulimia and overeating. It's typically more things like, I would say, sadly, but it's heart attacks. These girls die of heart attacks. It's just their body gets really, tries to conserve energy with starvation and just gets really, everything slows down. So that's pretty scary when you think about, 15, 16-year-olds having heart issues. So let's see, alcohol and substance abuse are 4 times more prevalent amongst those with eating disorders. So that's pretty big compared to the average population. This is the breakdown I think most people are kind of curious about. What's the breakdown of who suffers from what? So typically it's almost 4% are women, 2% are men. And then this is a big one, 30 to 40% of those that are actually seeking weight loss treatment through bariatric surgeons or wherever, medical weight loss, actually could be clinically diagnosed with binge eating disorder. So that's pretty significant. I would say, just kind of a side note, most of the eating disorders that are actually treated are either binge eating or anorexia. And that's because there's a lot of medical overlay. So thankfully, somebody in the medical community has said something, and it's come to their attention. Either they're really overweight or underweight, or they're having medical problems secondary. So given that bulimics kind of fly under the radar, and unfortunately, even though theirs is pretty deadly too, they often are not treated, actually. The majority of them are not. So here, just kind of a couple of statistics about eating and substance use. So 5 times greater in the eating disorder population. This is pretty big. 57% of men with binge eating disorder will also have lifelong substance use disorders. There are multiple shared neurotransmitters. We'll talk a little bit about that with both conditions. Both involve avoidance-based coping to numb out. So both of them kind of do that same thing on the brain where you kind of get a numb response. Let's see, what do I want to say here? A lot of people, there's a lot of unresolved conflict. So you'll see a lot of work done around social and relationships. You may know this term, arrested development. I'm not sure if Amy will go into this or not, but arrested development is this idea that brains are growing until, let's see, girls it's 22 and boys 24. So it's kind of interesting that the brain fully doesn't come online, meaning that you haven't reached your full potential. That's not necessarily IQ, it's just fully brains functioning on all cylinders. Strangely enough, what's happened the past couple of years is that's been pushed back further with social media and everybody's texting versus communicating. So now they say for boys it's 26 till their brains are fully online, and girls it's 24. So that's really pretty high. You know, this is post-college, obviously. So given that, when you introduce toxins like any sort of substance, you're going to stop that development. And in a social context, you'll stop brain growth. Some people don't develop their full IQ as far as that goes. But then socially, you get this concept where if you use drugs or alcohol at 14, 12, now you never learn to cope with your peers or anything. Sorry, I keep stepping away. You never learn to cope with your social issues and how to resolve conflict because you've always numbed out. So you get this concept of arrested development. We see it in eating disorder populations too, because they've starved themselves and kind of avoided that. So it's kind of an interesting concept. So individuals with alcohol or illicit drug use are 11 times more likely to have an eating disorder. So that's kind of the flip side. With the eating disorder population, it's 50% of our people have substance. Here, it's a little bit lower, but still significant. This is kind of scary. 5 to 10% of those with anorexia will die within 10 years of the onset. 18 to 20% will die after 20 years, and only 30 to 40 ever fully recover. I know those are super scary statistics, so kind of a caveat to that is I would say the majority of my patients are your kids' age. They're 14 years old, they're 12. I have some little girls that are even 11, 9. And interestingly enough, if we were to do prevention work, we'd actually start in the 3rd grade at 9 years old, not at the high school level. So that's kind of fascinating. When they take polls, I think it's something like 80% of girls want to lose weight and are more concerned about being thin than they are something tragic happening to their parents, which is kind of scary. And don't think boys are immune to this, because boys too are kind of in this as well. And even when they look at 3rd grade boys, they too are thinking about weight. It's obviously just through a more masculinity standpoint versus this chasing a thin ideal. So there's definitely hope. If girls get in at the young age, the first, within that first year, their likelihood to get better is probably 3-fold. And if they stay a year in treatment, kind of psychotherapy post any sort of symptoms, their likelihood to remain in recovery is really high. So that's typically what we have people do. So we see a lot of kids that are in high school. And that's a great time. It's more worrisome if they're in college or older because they've been doing it for so long. So let's see, what else is important here? We kind of went over that. A lot of anorexic people, unfortunately, prematurely die, usually of medical issues or heart failure. It's not usually intentional. So let's see, those are kind of all the death rates. You can kind of read through that. And then I would say with anorexic individuals, it's pretty high too, almost up to 18% are dependent on alcohol or drugs. And then this statistic, when you look at 50% of those with eating also have alcohol problems or drug, you can see that compared to the average population, it's only 9% with the two. So that's really big. I would definitely say statistically that's clinically significant. So this is probably what you guys are more interested in. So high school statistics. So when they do polls on 9th and 10th grade kids, what they find is this is, you know what, I'm sorry, this should have been for boys. But what you see here is that boys too are concerned. That's kind of the main point of it. They also have a preoccupation of changing body size. So it's both girls and boys that are affected. With boys, you see more anabolic steroid use. And I would say that's kind of, Amy would know more about this, but it's more of an old term. I think that there's a lot more things like supplements and protein shakes that have pre-workout type of stimulants that are probably more dangerous than what we'd see kids using steroids these days. So 40% of girls in the 10th grade want to change their body size, which is pretty big. 37% of 9th grade females think that they're too fat. This is a huge one, this fourth bullet. I put this in because I would say the majority of the young kids I see are high school kids, even junior high. They'll say something about bullying. And it may not be body shaming type of bullying, but it may be some sort of formal bullying. So pay attention to that. That's really important and can be really pretty emotionally scarring. So 2% kind of going into the college girls. Some of you may have older kiddos. So 91% of women surveyed on a college campus had tried to control their weight at some point by dieting. Really pretty big. And then 22% say that they often diet. I get asked a lot to go to sororities and talk about this kind of stuff too, because those girls have been doing it for so much longer. And often it's bulimia because it's been well covered up for a long time. Okay, so then contributing factors. So like I said, there's really no causation. There's just a kind of the perfect storm of things that happen. So there's a lot of individuals that have family history of addiction that develop an eating disorder. The predisposition that you see, this would kind of be more like personality, is impulsivity in kids, low self-esteem, and then this endogenous opioid system. So we'll talk more about that. That's basically the dopamine system, which might be more familiar. The end product is from dopamine is endorphins. So that's a little bit more palatable, I think. Trauma exposure, that's a big one. And I would say talk to your kids about what goes on in their day. Find a time, dinner time, something like that to talk about it, because remember that trauma is perceived differently. It doesn't have to be bullying. It could be body shaming. It could be something else that feels traumatic to the individual. So unhealthy norms or social pressures is a big factor. History of either physical or sexual abuse. And then individuals with either of these have higher rates of childhood trauma. That being said, I really despise when people say you have to have had sexual trauma in order to develop an eating disorder. It's just not true. Is it common that they've had some kind of trauma? Absolutely, but it's not always that type of trauma. And then clinical disorders that I think are really important to look at are depression and anxiety. These are huge in eating disorder populations. I rarely see anybody that it's just, hey, I really want to be thin and I need to look beautiful, that don't have some sort of other psychological diagnosis as well. I see a lot of bipolar disorders, pretty common. Sometimes social anxiety, that's something to look at, generalized anxiety. And I also have a flyer that we put kind of at the front door here, and then there's some further down at the end of the steps. That's kind of a checklist I created because I always get asked that, what are we looking for? It's either asked by high school students, how do you talk to your peer about it? Because obviously it's kind of a sensitive issue. Or parents, what are you looking for? What's normal, teenage behavior and what isn't? So that might be helpful. Okay, so brain disorders, this is kind of where it's a little bit more complex. So this is really interesting to me, but not only do pain pills activate the opioid system, it's also the one other thing that crosses over into what they call the blood-borne barrier is high fats and high sugars. So this is kind of crazy to think about, but somebody who took pain pills and somebody who just binged out on really like excessive amount of fast food. I'm not talking like one McDonald's meal. This would be excessive amounts of it. What ends up happening is that they get dopamine activation, just like somebody who was taking pain pills or somebody who was using heroin, cocaine. That's pretty scary. I think the other thing people are unaware of is that starvation, usually roughly like 3 days in, will also activate this system and start dumping out opioids onto the brain. And what's happening with that dopamine cascading is now it's really addictive. So you're teaching your brain, it's kind of that feel-good high you get at the gym. It's the runner's high, but in huge levels. So given that, that's really addicting, and you just train your brain to really like that. The brain remembers it, and so when you're stressed, now you're gonna rely on either overeating, drug use, or undereating. I would say that it patterns in the brain, just a really basic example, kind of like when you train a puppy. You train a puppy and you hang bells. They often have bells they sell at the pet shop, or you make them and you sell them, you put them on your back glass door, and you train the puppy to hit the bell, right? When they hit the bell, you come running, they go outside. So it's just simple, like classic conditioning or operant conditioning. And what's happening is that happens with drug use as well, or overeating. So you are just making a little imprint in the brain. So that neural pathway becomes open and usually is one of choice because it kind of gets worn down like a sidewalk. So kind of interesting to think about, but that's your classic conditioning. So the reward increases with the behavior. So therefore, if you were to eat 3,500 calories in under 30 minutes, bigger reward than just, a smaller amount of calories. Binge eating is defined, just so people know, it's 3 times a week, and it has to be in a really short amount of time. So this is like a massive amount of calories, anywhere from, 6,500 to 3,500 calories in 30 to 40 minutes, which is a huge amount of food. Often you get food hoarding, food hiding, things like that, shame around that. So dopamine receptors this also is seen in people who are obese. And when you do brain studies, the same areas of the brain are lit up as alcohol and cocaine as somebody who's really obese. So kind of interesting, or somebody with an eating disorder. Okay, so I'm not sure what slide I'm at, but I think we're doing okay with time. Okay, sounds like we gotta hurry up. So this is kind of just really nerding out stuff. If any of you have further questions, on the flyer, I put my email. I'm happy to answer questions if I can be helpful, because I know it's pretty scary if you have a kid that's starting to do some weird things with food. But really, it's the dopamine system that's really important. You may Google it. It'll tell you a lot about how that works. And it sounds like the PowerPoints are going to be online, too. Okay, great. Okay, yeah, does anyone have any questions? Because a lot of this is really just kind of statistics about how it all works. Anyone have questions?
Someone that might have the addiction to sugar, would that eventually lead, because of that gratification, that dopamine response that they get from eating the high levels of sugar, would that translate when they get older into drugs and alcohol, or what are the statistics on that?
This is kind of what you ask about, an area that's kind of questionable in the research. So they've only ever done animal studies on it. The amount of time that I've worked with addictive behaviors, I would tell you it's absolutely addictive, sugar is. And they do rat studies, and they put in water in the cage, and what happens is they have plain water, sugar water. They all go for the sugar water. Their brains light up as if they're taking pain pills. You take the water away, they have what looks like withdrawal. You put it back in, and it looks like binging. Just slurp up all this sugary water, don't even touch the other water. So it's really interesting, but yes, I would say it's very addictive, even at a young age. And you've taught the brain that pattern, just like you would teach a puppy to go outside, and ring the bell. So remember that brain imprinting is important. But yeah, no, absolutely. I would say
And
so.
yes, they can shift. They can shift it from one
Yeah,
thing to the
shift
other. And
between
actually,
diagnoses.
they can, and what's actually very common is when somebody stops abusing substances because they've been getting so many calories that way, they shift to sugar. So we
Right.
have more research that way than we have it the other way.
Yeah.
And so that's actually puts them at big risk for relapsing onto the alcohol if that was the drug of choice, because if they don't actually figure out the sugar craving, they're much more likely to relapse.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is kind of
Okay.
scary that it's the same activation, so.
Anybody else? We're going to shift over to Amy. Okay,
Okay,
great.
great.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name's Amy Rose, and I'm the Program Director to Recovery Happens Counseling Services. And I'm really excited. I'm here this evening, going to be providing some education and some prevention tools around substance abuse. We're going to be talking about vaping, marijuana, alcohol, and stages of substance abuse, and how you can have conversations with your kids, and some things to look at. And at the end, I too will open it up for questions, okay? So our program, we're an outpatient program. We specialize working with teens and young adults. We do individual counseling and group counseling. We offer a parent support group. It's really important. Oftentimes parents will wonder, well, when do I intervene? Right? And now with the legalization on marijuana, it's been a really tough battle. And when I get into this PowerPoint, you know, honestly, when do I intervene? The minute you find any type of paraphernalia, whether that's a vape device, anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and jump on in. So one of the biggest things is breaking down denial. Okay, this is a really tough topic for us to have to talk about, and it doesn't matter what our family background is, what neighborhood we live in, what school we go to. Substance abuse is across the board an epidemic right now. I mean, it's continuing to increase. And as a parent, I mean, my goodness, I don't even want to think about it for me. My son's only 10 and in 4th grade. But as parents especially, we have these ideas for our kids and the lives we want them to live. And so when it comes to substance abuse, we don't want to see it as being a problem. So if you are to find some type of paraphernalia or go through their phone and find a text message that's talking about it, it's really normal to want to minimize it, justify it, rationalize it, blame, avoid, or, you know, oftentimes parents will freak out, ground them, and then just hope that it all goes away, and now it's done. And for our teens and young adults, you know, in their generation right now, vaping especially is an epidemic. And it's normalized, right? I'm having schools reach out to me to come in and do these talks because they're having to shut down bathrooms on campus because kids are vaping in the bathrooms. You know, and same thing with marijuana use. And so for kids, there becomes this attitude around normalizing and minimizing it, and it's not that big of a deal. Everybody's doing it. You know, everyone's parents are letting them do that. You know, they love to make you feel like you're the only parent that's not cool and not letting them do it, but that's just not true. So I'm going to get into, we're going to talk about vaping first, and here's some statistics and some numbers here for you with 8th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders, and we get all of our information on the National Institute on Drug Abuse. It's a great resource site, so please, I encourage you to do your research. But so there's any vaping, which means any kind of vaping could be vape juice with no nicotine, with nicotine, or even marijuana, okay? And then there's vaping nicotine, vaping marijuana, or vaping just for the flavor. Now, vaping just for the flavor is there's 0 nicotine. So one of the things I want to remind you guys, and when I come in and I talk to students, I give them the same education. If we think about, how did vaping first get introduced to us? And originally this started out being something that was marketed towards adults to quit smoking cigarettes. And I don't know if you guys will remember, but if you could think back when you could walk through the mall and you saw those fake looking cigarettes, right? That, it was these plastic looking cigarettes, and it was advertised as this great thing of, hey, you can quit smoking cigarettes. There's no bad chemicals. Everyone knows that smoking cigarettes causes cancer. There's all these different types of, chemicals in the cigarettes that are not good for you. So they first marketed towards adults. Well, if we think about it, the tobacco industry, the marijuana industry, they want to make money, okay? So as they've continued to grow, vaping started to come into play. And guess who they marketed towards? Our kids. So just to give you an idea, an unfiltered cigarette, so the strongest level cigarette you can get is unfiltered, and that even then it's 36 milligrams of nicotine, okay? These devices that I'm going to talk to you about carry a level 50 to 60 level nicotine. So this is stronger than a non-filtered cigarette. Now, here's one of the things I want you to keep in mind when we're talking about substance abuse and for teens. Teens are hooked on intoxication. The name of the substance is an illusion. So teens tend to be drawn to things that change the way they feel and give them a rush. Not all teenagers are like this. Everyone has different types of personalities. There's some kids that err on the side of caution. They don't like to do things, risk-taking type behaviors. They want to have control of their surroundings, and they're too nervous to take risk-taking behaviors. But then there's other teenagers like myself. So I got sober my senior year of high school. I was 17 and I was addicted to marijuana and nicotine. We didn't have vape. We were smoking cigarettes and alcohol. And I'll tell you, I was a risk-taking type behavior child and adolescent. I didn't think about the consequence. I would choose the action that was going to give me a rush and an adrenaline type seeking behavior. And then when consequences would happen, it would be uncomfortable and I think I wouldn't do it again. And then I'd find myself doing it again. So what happens is, the reason why I bring that up, so with this nicotine, they're continuing to increase the levels for the purposes of intoxication. Teens are doing the 50 to 60 level nicotine because it's giving them a head rush. It's changing the way they feel. Girls, back to, on some of the eating disorders, it's taking away their appetites, right? This high level of nicotine. So these devices that started getting developed are targeted towards our teens. This is not about quitting smoking cigarettes. This is about, hey, you can have these devices, they're very discreet. So the Juul, the first one here on the picture, kids are putting this, it looks like a flash drive, a long skinny flash drive if you're not familiar with what this is, and they're sticking it inside their sleeves, and in class, it's very discreet. They're blowing the smoke inside their sleeve. It doesn't have a strong scent. Some of it have fruity type flavors, and they're getting to have a high on nicotine all day long if they want. They're taking bathroom breaks, right? And I'm going to get into talking to you about, affect dysregulation. In our society today, if you think about it, we don't ever have to feel uncomfortable or sit with any kind of discomfort if we don't want to. We're wired for instant gratification. So think about these devices. I hear all of the time about teenagers struggling with anxiety. I have anxiety. I'm overwhelmed. I'm stressed out, right? There's so much pressure on our teens today to be the best student. What college are you going to go to, right? Perform well in sports, be able to go to these parties, get intoxicated, be cool and popular, and then maintain everything at home with your family and not get in trouble. And it's so much, and our kids are cracking under this pressure. And when you have a discrete device like this that you can justify and minimize and say, well, it's not a drug, and it's not bad. There's no chemicals in it. This isn't causing me harm. It's okay. It's really hard to connect to the consequences. So I'm going to start getting into these consequences. I don't know if any of you have heard of this yet, and I talk to teens a lot about this when I come into the schools, but popcorn lung. So we are, right? Vaping is still fairly new in the grand scheme of things, but they're advertising it as it's this great thing. It's vaporizer, right? It's not hot smoke going down your lungs. It's not bad for you. There's no bad chemicals in it. And it's so much better than cigarettes. Teens are even going, well, hey, I'm vaping just for the flavor. There's no nicotine in it. This isn't bad for me. And there is a chemical in any type of vape juice that has a flavor, and it's called diacetyl. Diacetyl is the same exact chemical that's put into popcorn oils to make popcorn. So what was happening a long time ago is the factory workers working in the factory making popcorn, and they're ingesting this oil that has the diacetyl in it day in and day out, and it's giving them, this is where they coined the term popcorn lung. And in this picture down here at the bottom, you can see it's creating these air sacs in the lungs that are irreversible. So this same chemical that was doing this to this factory workers, that was in the oil of the popcorn, this same chemical is in any type of vape juice that has a flavor. If it has a flavor, it has diacetyl in it. And this is what it's causing. And so a lot of the things that we're seeing outwardly from people, you'll hear they'll be very like a wheezing, almost like it sounds like there's fluid in their lungs, crackling, cough, asthma, bronchitis. And the scary thing is it hasn't been around long enough, and studies haven't been done enough yet to know how long do you have to be vaping before this starts to happen? It's kind of like for people that were smoking cigarettes, there have been lots of people that smoked cigarettes for 20 years and then they quit and they didn't get lung cancer. And then there was people that smoked cigarettes for 5 years and got lung cancer. So there's just no telling. We don't know yet. But it's important that, and why I'm so passionate about getting this information out to as many people as possible, because the people that are selling these vape products, they're not advertising this chemical in their product. And they're trying to create laws right now where these different companies that are coming up with the vape liquid can't advertise towards our kids because they're creating products that, are fruity cereal flavors, all these flavors, again, that are geared towards attracting our kids. They've created, the laws have changed where now you have to be 21 years old across the board to buy any type of vape product or smoking, but still kids are going on Amazon or on these sites online, they're clicking the button that says I'm of age, and they're using their parents' credit card and they're buying this stuff. And they're getting it on campus. It's not hard for our kids to get a hold of this. There are smoke shops in the area that are selling to minors. Right? So again, it's just really important, and just so you can see these pictures again, the other one, Breeze, and then the last one is a sworn drop. And here's what I think. Go home today and ask your kids, hey, tell me what you know about this stuff. I'm curious. I went to a talk, and I want to know, tell me what it's like at your school. Do you notice this happening in the bathroom? Do you notice, and ask them what their thoughts are about it. And making it safe for them to talk to you about, and if their truth is, I've been wanting to try it, as parents, how do we make it safe for them to tell us that, right? They might not want to tell us out of fear. Am I going to get grounded? Am I going to lose all my privileges? But the biggest thing we have to do as parents is remove shame, okay? So we'll get into that in a minute. But one of the things I want to give you as advice as far as in removing shame, as parents, when we find out our kid has made a choice that scares us, right? We tend to, and as I give you this advice, I'm going to have to go home and remember it for myself because I'll do the same exact thing, right? When my son makes a choice that I don't like and ultimately it scares me, what's my first thing that comes out of my mouth? What are you thinking, right? And I instantly go into, and my son hears this all the time, do you not remember what I do for a living? What in your mind would make you think I'd be okay with that, right? And so what happens is he goes right into a mode where he gets really small and shuts down and gets scared. And it's like, okay, when is this going to be over? And he's not going to tell me his truth, right? I don't know if you guys realize this, but at the candy store in the mall, they sell bubblegum cigarettes to our kids, right? Now, my son goes to a private Christian school. That doesn't matter, okay? Doesn't make him different or separate him from all of our kids. And what does he do when he goes into the candy store? My son's a bit of a risk taker. He sees these candy bubblegum cigarettes and his little eyes light up. He's with another friend and the parent, she's a good mom, right? But she buys these for both our boys and doesn't see a problem with it. And the boys get home and they think it's the coolest thing. The little powdered sugar just comes right out when they blow on it. And he gets home and I find these, and just like I told you, what was my reaction? What are you thinking? You know, because I'll tell you as a mom, my first panic is, oh my gosh, it's happening. And I'm losing control and I'm afraid. What does this mean if my son is drawn to this? What does this mean about him? And now all these ideas and these plans I have for him, I'm powerless and I'm losing control. And if I am judging my own son for being drawn to this, you're going to judge him. So I have to keep this hidden. That's the big thing with shame. Guilt, you can feel bad about something. Shame is, this is a piece I don't like, and then it has representation on me, and I have to keep it hidden. Okay? So instead, after I caught myself shaming my son, I had to pull myself back and go, I get it, buddy. You probably had so much fun blowing that little powdered sugar out with your friends. And the minute he saw I wasn't mad anymore, he goes, I did. It was fun. And I said, okay, you know, but then talking about and playing the tape out for him, right? Because as Emma was talking about, their prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for all your right from wrong thinking, your morals, your values, your judgment calls, and here's the biggest, impulsive decisions, okay? That's not done fully being developed till 25, 26 years old. Substance abuse stunts that development. Okay? And so to be able to play the tape out and go, wait a minute, this was fun in the moment, but what's going to happen if I get caught at school? And I even had to break that down to him at his age level. If you would have brought these to school to show off, what do you think would have happened? You would have gotten suspended, right? They're not thinking that far out. And when he was picking out those little bubblegum cigarettes, the thought in his mind did not occur to him, this is going to hurt mom's feelings. He didn't think about me. He thought about in the moment what was going to be fun and the rush of it. So I want you to keep that in mind. That's a very young age, but look, that's how it starts out, at a very young age. And so even where your kids are at right now, talking about the vaping, they're not bad if their truth is they're curious and drawn to it. And the other thing I want you to keep in mind as parents, as we're going we're going to start talking about marijuana. One of the biggest mistakes we make as parents, we try to understand our children, how we're built and pieced together, how our experience was. And first of all, our children are not us. They're very different. And then the world they're living in today is completely different from when we were in high school and what was going on. And we're going to get into that right now with marijuana. So I'm just curious, and anyone can kind of shout out a response of what your guess is, but in 2010, we were starting to see it was more likely for a teenager to try marijuana for the first time, even over nicotine or alcohol. Why do you guys think that is? Legalization? Any other guesses? Do one of you boys have a guess? No? Okay, I won't put you on the spot, sorry. So it's so easy to get. It's more accessible for our kids to get. I can literally, I tell kids this all the time, I can go to any high school. It does not matter the high school, public, private, doesn't matter the neighborhood, and if I looked the role and the part, I could leave that day from that high school with marijuana or a connection on how to get it. That's how accessible marijuana is. Alcohol, kids have to pay somebody to go buy a bottle. They have to risk stealing the bottle and not getting caught. Same thing with nicotine in the stores. It has changed a little bit more now with the vaping products. Those are easier to get than it was for kids to get actual cigarettes. But marijuana is so easy and accessible for our kids to get. So I want to go over a couple statistics on marijuana. One of the biggest things I face around breaking down denial with teenagers is they say, everybody's doing it. It's not bad for you. It's a plant. It's grown in the ground. It's natural. It's not harmful. Okay, tobacco is a plant that's grown in the ground that's harmful. Cocaine is a plant that's grown in the ground, right? Poison ivy, poison oak. These are all things. So we have to step away from this idea of, hey, it's a plant, it's nature, it's fine, right? No. This is called denial and justifying and rationalizing something we want so bad to hold on to that's not good for us. The other thing is, there doesn't have to be an argument between you and your kids, because the bottom line is you have to be 21 years old to have it. It's illegal. Anyone under 21 years old, it's illegal. The other thing to keep in mind when people are saying, well, for medical purposes, it's, doctors are prescribing it. Here's what people aren't realizing, and I always encourage everybody, do your research. Doctors, legitimate doctors that are prescribing, they're prescribing CBD oil for people with chronic back pain. Veterinarians now are using CBD oil for animals with anxiety. CBD, so here's the big difference. What makes marijuana a drug and what makes it addictive? THC. CBD does not have THC in it, okay? So what's happening is a lot of these dispensaries that are opening up, or these cannabis shops where you can go in and get your medical card, that it is legal, right, now that the law's changed, really there aren't actual, doctors where you're seeking out help, right? Like if you go to a psychiatrist and you're seeing a psychiatrist to get evaluated for depression, pretty much you can go into any of these shops as long as you have the money, you're the age, and I could go in there right now today and say this. Large groups of people make me nervous. Boom. You're a candidate for marijuana? Here you go. I have anxiety. Boom. That's the easiest one right there. Anxiety, sleeping problems, right? These are the things that people are saying, and they can get access to a medical marijuana card. And again, it's minimizing and downplaying the reality of it, because I want to actually talk to you about the marijuana that our kids have access to today. So THC, like I told you, it being a drug, and this is what gets you high, this is what's very addicting. In the 90s, in the plant, because I'm going to talk to you in just a second about wax. In the plant, they didn't have wax. They didn't have these dab pens. I'm going to talk to you all about that. They had the plant. And in the 90s, THC was 3.96%. Today, it's 30 to 40% THC in the plant. Now, this is something that continues to go up in potency. It's not going to stop, because we are a society that wants what we want right now. Actually, we wanted it yesterday, and we want the biggest bang for our buck. Instant gratification, and then we build up a tolerance, right? And then we need to keep upping it to get the same effect produced that we originally fell in love with. So I'm quite honestly terrified. What is the level of THC in plants going to be when my son is in high school? Because this is continuing to go up. So to show you a picture of what that looks like physically in the plant, this is a picture of a plant to the left of what it looked like in the 90s. This is a picture to the right of what it looks like today. And it's because people are altering the marijuana plants, they're increasing the THC, they're adding chemicals to make it more and more potent to produce different types of highs. Today in our world, you can find marijuana plants that are specific for being a downer. You can find marijuana plants that are specific for being an upper, right? So it's very scary what our kids have access to. And nobody ever thought it was possible to overdose on marijuana. When we're thinking of marijuana, oftentimes people are thinking of what it used to be in the 70s, the 80s. It practically wasn't a drug then compared to what it is today. So here's some pictures of paraphernalia. In this top up here left, it's, part of the plant in a pipe. Does anyone know what that top right picture is? Any guesses on what that is? A bong? I get that one a lot. So one of the things I want you to think about when we're thinking of how we want to continue in our society, people are constantly looking for ways, how can I give you more, produce more of a product, an even better product, and make more money, okay? So marijuana, that's fine, and edibles have always kind of been a thing, but what first came out and hit our generation of kids is what's called dabbing. Now, dabbing is where they take concentrated wax. So this bottom left picture here, this is a picture of wax. Wax is concentrated THC. This is extracted from the plant. So they're extracting THC by itself, creating it into a wax. Now, remember how I told you it was 40% THC in the plant when they're getting high? When you do this, it's possible for you now to smoke 90 to 100% THC. So they created this product originally that's called a dab rig. And it's a special piece that attaches to a bong, and kids are using butane gas lighters, melting up the wax, torching it. One hit off this and they're turning into zombies. Now, overdosing is starting to happen. Okay, and I'm going to get into that in a second, and with edibles. But what was scary is, this product that's getting pushed out there and these dab rigs and the butane gas lighters, what started to happen is these butane gas lighters started to blow up on people. At Bella Vista several years ago, a kid lost half of his face to severe burns from a butane gas lighter blowing up on him. Okay? Now, the industry, you would think any company that produces a product that's going to severely injure your loved one or even kill them, they'd be shut down, right? Like, your family would be extremely wealthy and they would be shut down. Not the marijuana industry. What happened with them instead is they said, oh my gosh, we're so sorry. Please don't stop smoking the wax. We're going to create a product that doesn't blow up on you anymore. And it's very discreet and it doesn't have a scent, and you can continue to use and be high every day if you choose. This is a dab pen. So this looks very similar to even some of these vape pens that are out there. So as parents were wondering, how do I know the difference? How do I know what's a vape pen and what's a dab pen? So if you look at this substance here where they're scraping off the wax, in these cartridges, THC wax is more, it almost looks like a thick honey oil, okay? The vape juice is a very, it's a clear, liquidy, type product. There's nothing thick and oily about it in its consistency. So you'll clearly be able to tell the difference. This wax, so they're scraping it off, putting it inside. Now they make cartridges with the wax already in it, so you don't have to do that. But these dab pens, the coils heat up, melt the wax, and you can get high on this stuff day in and day out. Remember how I told you how addicting THC is? So our kids that have access to this, they're getting high on a 90 to 100% THC, and the symptoms that we're seeing coming into our program, we've got kids that are coming in sucked up, pale gray skin, and circles around their eyes. And their moods vary from extreme highs and lows, highs of anger and rage, lows of sadness, depression, and suicidal thoughts. And it's a result, that was opiate addiction. Those were the symptoms that we were seeing from that. Today, it's because of wax. I want to talk to you a little bit about edibles. So edibles, and again, these products that you're seeing that are sold in some of these marijuana shops, they're being marketed towards our kids. The cereal, Cap'n Munch, Fruity Loopies, Chronic Toast Crunch, right? They're developing these candies for kids, candy gummy bears with THC in it. Now, here's the thing. Remember when we were talking about overdosing? How is this possible? How is this happening? No one ever dreamt that it was possible to overdose on marijuana. Well, what's happening, first of all of us, our bodies are made up differently, and we react to things and respond to things differently. How do we know how our body is going to respond to 90 to 100% THC? How many puffs off this dab pen do you take before you know your limits? When you think of adults that are going to get-togethers and they're having wine and socializing, right? As you get older, you kind of learn what your limits are. Teenagers don't know what their limits are, and when they're getting together to use any type of substances, the goal is to reach intoxication at the biggest level. So these edibles, an average edible can have, one dose of THC is 10 milligrams. Some of these edibles can have anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 levels of THC in these edibles. So absorption time, here's the thing that most teenagers, even adults, don't realize. When you take an edible, it takes 45 minutes to absorb. Now, most of our teenagers, what do you think is going to happen when they take an edible and they don't feel anything in 15 minutes? They're going to take more. Now, what happens, and now, first of all, back to that picture of those gummy bears, what kid isn't going to eat the whole bag? It's candy, right? So who knows if each gummy bear has 10 to 20 milligrams, right? And then all of that's hitting them at one time. This is how overdosing is happening. This is where we're seeing panic attacks. Kids are going into psychosis, right? They're profusely vomiting, and they're referring to this as greening out. This is happening even with the dabbing on the dab pens. Again, they're not seeing an effect right away, and then it all kicks in at once, and it's too much for their body to handle. Now, this is scary stuff to talk about, right? We don't want to think about this happening. I know as a parent, I don't want to think about my son getting his hands on this someday, but I can't be afraid to talk about this stuff. How do I equip my child with tools in dealing with temptation? Temptation is something we're going to face for all of our life. And it's not just around substance abuse. It's with anything, right? Temptation is being drawn to doing something we know we shouldn't be doing. It would be easy if we didn't want to do it. What makes it temptation is wanting to do it even though we know we shouldn't be doing it. That is a tough battle. Even I still as an adult, right, struggle when I'm like, okay, I'm not eating sweets at this party. I'm gonna stay disciplined, right? And being tempted, our kids are losing touch with their body, is having a reaction. And I talk with kids about this all the time. I ask them, when you're struggling with temptation, what does that feel like in your body? And even when I go in and I do talks, I just did a big talk with the Rockland Youth for Coalition, and they had kids from the ages of 8 to 15 in a room doing a basketball camp. And the little kids, when I ask this question, when there's something in front of you and you know, ooh, I shouldn't do this, it's not the right thing, because we all have that. What does that feel like in your body? All these little kids, 8, 9, my own son was there. Their little hands shoot up and they say, my stomach starts to feel sick. I had one kid say, I feel like I have spiders in my tummy, right? So cute. And it's alerting them to, yes, your body is trying to tell you this isn't safe, this isn't a good choice. If we don't have talks with our kids at a very young age about how to address that, they start to learn how to detach and dismiss from that alert happening in their body. How do they do that? They have to minimize, rationalize, and justify their want for this. It's just vape, it's not bad. It's not like I'm trying marijuana. This vape juice doesn't even have any nicotine in it. Right? This is how the patterns start to happen. And then when they give into it, we all draw lines in the sand and we go, okay, as long as it doesn't look like this, as long as I'm just doing it on the weekends, as long as I'm just doing it when I'm not at school, then it's not bad. And this line continues to get pushed out and pushed out and pushed out. Oh, and well, really quick, a good resource, you can go on YouTube and watch the Other Side of Cannabis documentary. This is a really good resource. And just so you know, this PowerPoint is going to be available to all of you. You can just reach out to Nicole at the end, get the information, and she can get you this, just in case you didn't get anything, this information down. So I want to talk to you about marijuana in the young developing brain. Most people, or teenagers especially, don't think that marijuana is having any kind of effect on their brain, negative consequences. So you remember when I told you how their prefrontal lobe is not done being developed till 25, 26 years old? What's happening is marijuana is coming in and stunting their development. And so what that ends up looking like is how many of us, we know adults that are in their 30s and their 40s, but developmentally, they're still coming from a place developmentally as a teenager. I have seen kids that are adults even that come into our program, they've been smoking marijuana ever since they were 15 years old, and some of them are 27, 28 years old, but the way their lives and their view on the world and how they show up to relationships is coming from the same way of a 15-year-old's brain processing, making decisions. I've known clients that come in, and even though they're 27, 28 years old, haven't continued any of their education, maybe even haven't had a high school diploma. They're working at a fast food, no car or driver's license, and they've become comfortable being uncomfortable. And it's always everybody else, right? There's a reason. Kids, even in high school, that are failing certain classes, it's the teacher's fault. It's because the work's too hard. There's all these reasonings behind that. And again, marijuana comes in, and most kids, when they're talking about, well, I have anxiety, it helps me with my anxiety. That's not true. So our amygdala, which is responsible for our anxiety and our emotion and fear, so when kids are having paranoia, going paranoid and having these panic attacks, it's the amygdala that marijuana is beating up on. And it's creating this vicious cycle of where our kids only start to feel calm and grounded when they're under the influence of marijuana. The minute they're off of it, this is where they're having the extreme highs and lows and just up and down. The other thing I hear a lot is it helps me with my eating, and this is not true as well. Over a long-term period of using, what ends up happening is the hypothalamus, it has a reverse effect. The hypothalamus is control of our hormone levels, our body temperature, our appetite, and it's having a reverse effect beating up on that part of our brain and taking away kids' appetites. So this is, and the stronger the THC is, so this is what we're seeing with the wax, this is what's creating the loss of appetite, and it's having a reverse effect. So again, I encourage you, go home with some of this information, ask your kids, what are your thoughts about this? What are you noticing? Like, have you ever heard about wax? Do you know anyone at school? You're not going to get in trouble. I just want to talk to you about it. What's your understanding of it? Because this is just what I learned about it tonight. And pull up and bring up some research for you guys to talk about at the dinner table together, and have these types of discussions. And over here, I want to show you, it's really important in the development of our kids' brains, especially at the age of 16. So you can see down here in the 20s, the darker the brain is, that's a more developed brain. The whole point is we want to get kids to wait before they're introducing substances into their world, because the more their brain is developed, the more they're going to have the capacity to pause and play the tape out. When consequences are happening, they're going to have more of a capacity to go, this is not for me, and I see further than this instant gratification moment, and I'm going to step away from this. I want to talk to you a little bit about alcohol and drinking. Alcohol, again, this is another one that gets minimized and rationalized as a normal thing that happens in high school, that it's normal for kids to go to parties and drink and get drunk, and parents will even say, just call me, I'll come pick you up, we'll get you an Uber. But here's the scary thing with teens and alcohol and why it's important to hold the line with when you're 21 and it's legal. This is when you get to introduce alcohol into your life. Teens, they're not drinking for socialization. They're drinking to get intoxicated. They don't know yet how to, okay, how many, should I have one drink, drink some water in between, right? And know how my body is going to be affected by this. Teens, and even adults in general, they'll say, yes, drinking and driving is bad. But why is it still happening, right? Teens are afraid of getting in trouble. They've drank too much. They didn't realize their limits. They've got to be at home. And the first thing they're thinking about is, I just need to get home and get in bed and this will all go away, right? And they're getting behind the wheel and operating a vehicle. And I have to tell you, my story, it's so painful for me to talk about, but I share it because if it reaches one person, it was worth it for me to have to fight through it and share it. I had a stepson who I came into his life when he was 9 years old. Beautiful young man, and I'm so grateful that I got to be a part of being his stepmom, another mom to love him and raise him, and he was such a good boy. He'd turned 22 years old, he'd graduated college, he'd got his real estate license. My son, Brandon, thought Frankie was the most amazing person in the whole world. He looked up to him. They would go they called it Chipotle, going to Chipotle. And he would come to all my son's baseball games. And Frankie made one stupid mistake, and it changed everything. Frankie was at a bar drinking with friends home from college. And for whatever reason, he decided to get behind the wheel, and him and one of his best friends were in the car. They were both intoxicated. He lost control of the car. He hit a pole, and it killed both of them instantly. And I'll tell you, I'm so mad, and I feel so powerless and defeated. And, this is what I do for a living. Frankie knew drinking and driving was bad. He wasn't, we don't know what he was thinking. I'm not going to get to know what he was thinking when he made that choice. He's a good kid that made one bad decision that changed everything. And we don't get a redo. We don't get a redo. And I still struggle with thinking he's just maybe on vacation or studying abroad. My mind wants to go to all these things, but then when we have to have situations like holidays or his birthday, or I just got married in October and he was supposed to be standing up there with my son and having to face the realization that it's over for us. We don't get a redo. So as parents, I share this with you because when you feel bad about invading your child's privacy or you feel bad for being strict, don't. Go through your kids' social media. Make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? If they're trying to convince you that it's okay to go to a party, have the talk with them on if you do get yourself in a situation, no matter what, we're going to work through it together, right? There might be some consequences, but there's no consequence big enough than you losing your life. And there's a couple of kids in here tonight. If you have friends, you're in a situation where you have a friend that's been drinking too much and they want to drive. I would much rather, most friends and kids, when I'm talking to them, they're worried about their friend getting mad at them, or calling them a snitch or ratting them out. You'd much rather have your friend be mad at you in the moment and still be alive. Call another adult, get them involved for help. I had a teacher at Bella Vista kind of chime in when I was talking. She said, take their keys and throw them on the roof. It doesn't matter, right? That's what a good friend does. You don't think about this could ever be an option. No one thinks this is going to happen to them. I surely did not think that I would be one of these families telling you this story. I've heard stories like this time and time again, and I feel bad for these families. I'd never thought it would happen to our family. You know, this is a very real thing. And then not even just with alcohol, how many of our kids are vaping, or I'm sorry, smoking out of these dab pens where it's 90 to 100% THC and getting behind the wheel and operating a vehicle? It's terrifying. They think it's making them a better, aware driver. No, it's not, right? So again, check your kids' cars. Go through it, see if you find paraphernalia. Go through their room, because it's better to raise the bottom and make it as hard as possible on them to fall into temptation and make bad choices than to wait and have a life-changing consequence. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the brain and with alcohol, and everyone's different, but here's what's kind of scary. It shows you 1 to 2 drinks affects memory, 3 to 4 drinks affects reward and judgment, 5 to 6 affects movement, 7 to 8 affects sensation, vision, 9 to 10 coordination, more than 10 are vital centers, right? So alcohol poisoning. And here's the thing. Somebody, because their metabolism can be different and their body makeup can be different, can have 5 to 6 drinks and only experience what maybe 1 to 4 drinks would maybe be, somewhere in that category. Another person can have 1 to 2 drinks and experience what someone else with 7 to 8 drinks maybe even have. There's just no telling. Molly is another substance I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, but ask your kids. Again, going home tonight, hey, I learned about Molly. Do you know what that is? So it's a rave-type drug. Kids are doing this even for dances. It's an upper. It heightens all your senses. But what can happen in overdosing on this, some long-term effects, anxiety, depression, memory loss, but it's getting glamorized to kids as this fun thing to do, going to these music festivals, enhancing their experience. And again, it's putting a pill in your mouth and not ultimately knowing the full effects of what could be happening to you. So again, our kids are not too young to have these conversations with and asking them and giving them the education on what could happen when they put this into their body. Same thing with different hallucinogens. Kids, we have had kids that, again, their perception of what's real is highly altered. We've had kids throughout the years have to go into the hospital because they overdose on this stuff and they panic and they freak out. We had a kid that attacked, one of his friends was just trying, who wasn't under the influence, was just trying to drive him home and get him home safe. They were on the freeway, and he freaked out and attacked the kid. Luckily, the kid was able to pull over and was smart enough to call an adult and get an adult involved for help. But it's like it wasn't his friend anymore, and he didn't know how to talk him down and calm him down. It's really scary how far this can escalate. Codeine cough syrup is a huge one. Kids are putting this in with alcohol, and it's intoxicating them on a whole other level and of a downer, right? It's really scary. They're putting this in the marijuana blunts that they're rolling and smoking, and again, it's taking the intoxication level to a whole other, stronger level of intoxication and a downer. And if you think about, the rap music that our kids are listening to today, one of the other things that's so big, lean and Xanax and codeine, they're glamorizing this to our kids like it's so much fun. And even some of the rappers today are dying in their early 20s from an overdose on this stuff. So lean, this is codeine cough syrup mixed in with soda. And then they'll mix it in with alcohol. Xanax, Xans, Xanny bars. This is a benzodiazepine. People get prescribed this for anxiety, but our kids are getting this glamorized too. It's more of a downer, and they're taking this stuff, and they're doing it with getting high. And then ultimately, what ends up happening, no one likes this picture when I start talking about this as a substance, heroin. We all get freaked out about this. When we're thinking of addiction and substance abuse, we're thinking this is what an addict is, the worst of the worst, right? And it's terrifying. Heroin, opiate addiction, doesn't just happen overnight. It starts with vaping. moving into smoking marijuana, moving into trying other prescription pills. So different prescription pills like Vicodin, Oxycontin, Percocets, right? Well, what happens, they're extremely addicting, and when you develop a habit of 8 to 10 pills a day, and if you don't get your pills in, your body withdraws. Think about the worst flu that you've ever had in your life, okay? Times that by 10. That's opiate withdrawal. Now, when you can't afford the pills at that level, black tar heroin is a lot cheaper. And the age group that I'm seeing this happening in is between 18 and 25. This is where it's happening. And what I'm seeing where our substance abuse is starting is middle school with vaping. And then there's something to be said about the summer of 8th grade year before going into freshman year where kids are getting curious about marijuana. Okay, so it's continuing to progress at more of a rapid pace. So stages of substance abuse. How do I know what to look for? When should I intervene? And we have to really get past what our own ideas of what addiction is. So I don't know about you guys, but for me growing up, I grew up in 2 really large families. And when I thought of an addict, I thought of somebody that was, a junkie, or again, kind of like doing the worst of the worst, going to jail. When I thought about an alcoholic, I thought of a homeless person drinking out of a brown paper bag. This is not the case, okay? So you can imagine for me, I have addiction that runs and alcoholism that runs in both sides of my family, okay? My mom's one of 8, my dad's one of 7. I really didn't have much of a chance. And for me, at 17 years old, and by this time, I was co-captain of the cheerleading squad, homecoming princess. I was popular. My parents were proud of me. I was smoking marijuana every single day. I was drinking on the weekends. I was doing Molly occasionally. I was smoking cigarettes. And what started happening is I started caring more about the substances than all the other things that used to matter to me in my life. Grades were going down. I was failing. Consequences were happening. And it didn't matter. I was angry, and it was everybody else's fault. And so again, it's important to know these different stages. The first stage is the experimentation stage. This is a one-time occurrence. This is the first time somebody tries something, they make up their mind right then and there whether this is for them or not. Okay? If they decide, I didn't like that, and like the way that made me feel, I'm done. Or, I like that, I can't wait to do it again. The experiment is done. It's a one-time occurrence. Stage 2 is misuse. This is using on special occasions. Maybe, before a high school dance, for your birthday, on 4/20, the biggest pot smoking day out of the year. That's another one. Go home, ask your kids, hey, what do you know about 4/20? What do you hear from other kids about that, okay? So this is special occasions, but once consequences start happening, they either decide, this is not for me, I don't like the way this affects me, or they move into stage 3, which is substance abuse. Substance abuse is not addiction yet. Substance abuse is they're using consequences in spite of they're using substances in spite of the consequences. Doesn't matter that their grades have gotten down, that they've been benched from being able to play certain games, or even kicked off the team, that they're getting grounded, losing trust, their morals, their values are starting to shift. They start to become a little bit more recluse into their bedroom. Their friends and social settings might start to change. We get a lot of kids that come into our program at this stage. When you can provide them with resources and tools to move through this and to overcome it, if they do not struggle with addiction, they will be able to walk away from it. Where addiction starts to happen, and this is where we have to pull away from the mindset of that there's a certain age or a certain description, right? Kind of like the ones I gave you. Stage 4, chemical dependency, is when they become preoccupied with it, and it's not just about, the actual substance. It's everything that goes into it. It's the paraphernalia. It's being so aware and on top of all the different devices, the dab pens, making your own edibles, right? These kids get so engulfed in this stuff and they become so obsessed and it starts to take precedent over everything, right? And it doesn't matter about the consequences. They start wanting to, the things that they used to love to be involved in. I know for myself, I can only speak for me, cheerleading, I did it most of my life. I started to not care about it anymore. I was eventually voted off the squad. And instead of taking responsibility, I blamed the girls. It was their fault. You know, how dare they? When I'm failing classes and there's no way I'm going to get to go away to a four-year university college, my attitude became, I don't care about college. I don't want to go to college. That's not true. That's substance abuse. And when you provide them with resources and tools, you can have the best intentions and go, okay, I'm going to step away from it. And then they find themselves doing it again and again. And the shame that comes with that and feeling helpless. And I know for me personally, I hated that I couldn't truly stop on my own if I wanted to. I eventually continued to go back to it. You know, so just keep that in mind. And we're noticing what are variables contributing to a rapid progression. Genetics, it running in your family, early onset of first use, an undeveloped brain, combination of drugs. Kids are using more than one substance at a time. And then their environment. If you think about the social media our kids are involved with today, and even not just with substance abuse, bullying, right? Used to, when there was a problem at school, you could go home and get away from it. Not anymore. Now, if another kid has an issue with you, they're posting stuff on social media, everyone can see it and comment on it and tear that person apart, and that person that's the victim can't get it down, right? You can report it and hope that it gets down. And kids, you know, you go through their Snapchat stories, and there's all these stories that disappear within 24 hours of kids smoking and blowing clouds into the video, right? And glamorizing their use. They're videoing everything that they do. Even on Instagram, at the very top of it, there's videos that go away within 24 hours. Kids have Finsta accounts. This is a fake Instagram account. They have their regular one that parents know about, that everyone can see, and then they have a Finsta account where you can post whatever you want, their name's not attached to it, right? And they're posting pictures of using, they're posting pictures at parties, all types of things, different memes. You know, so again, it's important to know your kids are going to hate you for going through their stuff. They're not going to want you to invade their privacy, but make yourself familiar with social media. This is something that's growing very fast and will continue to go way over your head. You don't want to be left in the dark and have, excuse me, no idea at what some of the things your kid's being involved in. This is a graph that shows you, you know, when we're talking about age of onset of first use, right, and how the progression can happen. So the pillar where it's a green pillar is an individual that does not have a history of substance abuse in their family. The orange pillar is an individual that does have a history within their family of substance abuse. If a person down here at the bottom, the age of 13, starts doing any kind of substances, already, even an individual that doesn't have it running in their family has a 40% chance of struggling with addiction. Now, if that individual does have it running in their family, you see how it goes up to almost a 60% chance. That number and risk factor goes down the older they are and wait to introduce this into their body. So we're constantly encouraging kids, let your brain develop, let yourself get more mature before you're introducing this into your world, because when you do that, you have more of a chance of fighting addiction coming on and being able to pause and play the tape out with consequences and to get, you know, resources that you've developed along the way into your world and process how it's showing up for you. What can you do as parents? Create a home contract. We work with parents all the time on this. Create structure and boundaries. I'm going to randomly pop a drug test on you. You want to get your driver's license? Can you pass a test? This isn't me being, thinking badly of you. I'm just holding you accountable. And just know that in our home, if you want more privileges, I might pop one of these tests on you randomly at any given moment, right? And then what are the consequences going to be if it's positive for something? Right? Having it listed out. If being grounded, marijuana takes anywhere from 12 to 15 days to get out of your system with these instant urine tests. Okay? The whole theory of it taking 30 days, that's not true. With those little urine sample tests, it takes 12 to 15 days. The reason, and you can still have 50 nanograms of THC in your system, and it'll provide a clean test. Those last 50 nanograms take another 12 to 15 days. This is where you're hearing the 30-day period, the theory. So ultimately, you should know, if you use one of these drug testing kits and it comes up positive, your child has used in the last 12 to 15 days. Okay? And then listing out for you what's realistic is consequences in your home. And you can even use this with things like curfew. If you come home late past the time, next time you go out, curfew's an hour earlier, right? So this is really good to have. That way it's open discussion, it's known what's going to happen, and you can let your kids use you as the out to their friends. Dealing with temptation. Sorry, man, I can't do that. My parents randomly drug test. I don't want to lose my car. I don't want to lose my phone. Let them use you as the out. This is a good thing. And I'm just going to end here with some resources. There's 12-step meetings all throughout the community. There's Alateen. We have parent support groups. Yoga and meditation are great resources that we use for teenagers and families. And Celebrate Recovery. These are all amazing things that people can go to turn to as tools. So again, these PowerPoints will be provided to you if you would like them, but I would love to open it up now for questions. Any questions that you guys have, please ask away.
We're kind of letting it
Yes.
soak in, huh? Can I come to you real fast with this since we're taping?
Oh yes, because when you speak into the microphone, the recording will be able to hear your question.
I was asking about the slide about a few back that had the 4 stages.
Yes.
And how do you determine the different stages? Do you have any suggestion for that?
Absolutely. So when parents will say to me, how do I intervene? Where do I know where I'm at? Well, first of all, I hate to say this and break this to you parents, but if you have found any kind of paraphernalia in your child's room or anything that your child has, that's the first time you have found it. That's not the first time they have done it. So it's important to even right then, right, to be able to offer them resources, to be able to offer them counseling, to be able to talk about why they're drawn to that, how it's showing up in their life. If you start to see a change in your child, it's kind of tough because as teenage years, their hormones are all over the place. And so some of these signs, like in stage 3 that I was talking about, where their morals and values start to change, the I don't care attitude, isolating more in their room, some of this doesn't necessarily mean drug use, right? Some of this can just be a hormonal teenager going through a tough time. But again, so if you're starting to see some of these signs, you're not a bad parent for throwing in a random drug test and checking and verifying, going through their phone. Because if this is starting to come up and you do find substance abuse, they do need somebody that they can talk to about this. It's really important to be able to have these conversations.
And I think the piece I'd add that we see a lot at school, I'm the mental health specialist, my name is Nicole Laubach, is with substance abuse, you're going to start noticing the friendships changing. So they might, kids that they've been around forever, they're starting to drift with some different friends, and you're maybe questioning what are their other friends up to, and just kind of pay attention to what's the shift in the behavior. They also might start to move away from things they used to really enjoy. So if they were an athlete and suddenly they're like, oh, I don't really want to try out this year. Doesn't mean it's happening, and that also can be a symptom of depression, right? But you just kind of start noticing the behavior changes and start asking questions. Also, to tell you guys, you can contact the school. It's not about getting them in trouble, but if you wanted to just be like, I'm noticing this and that, you know, can I just brainstorm with you? You know, we would never come down on them as a disciplinary thing if you're just asking questions about their behavior and want to go, would you be worried if this was your kid? And I might be like, yeah, trust your gut. So, oh, and wanted to make sure everybody knows the flyer for Recovery Happens is up here. Some of Emma's information is outside, but Recovery Happens has an amazing website. There's a book about how to talk to your student about all of this.
Absolutely.
I mean, they have links to all sorts of things, so it's a really good resource so that you don't feel like you're just going down the rabbit hole online. You know, like you can start with them, and
Yes.
they're fantastic.
Yes.
I kind of forgot my question, but ultimately, you were saying what are the resources. Can you give me, like, let's say we're dealing with the stage 3
Yes.
aspect of it. What would be the first place you would say go and check out?
Honestly, I would research different programs. People often will want to kind of take a look at, well, what does my insurance cover? And it's tough because not a lot of insurances cover different substance abuse programs. We have certain insurances that we take, but honestly, give me a call. Take my brochure, because at our program, a counselor you'll get to meet with right away, and they'll get you started in how do I step in as a parent and regain the control of what's going on? How do I provide tools for my child? We work with you on all of that. We have a parent support group at all of our different locations because we have a Roseville office, Fair Oaks, Davis, and Walnut Creek. And every Thursday from 5:30 to 7, we run a parent support group. And I encourage any of you, you can contact us and come check that out for the first time for free. And if you decide, even before getting your child involved in counseling, you know what, I want to continue to come to group, it's $35 a group. And you get to be around other parents that are going through what you're going through or similarities, and you're all there for the same reason and for some support and to be able to build each other up. And there's a counselor leading it and running different topics, and then they're providing you with resources to leave with. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And there are, you could go, there's CORE and Placer. They have different types of resources, but please reach out to me.
And there is a list of some local resources out on the table. It's kind of like a half sheet, so if you wanted to grab that, but Recovery Happens.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Do you do talks with the kids at the school? Would you go in and talk to provide this presentation to the students as well?
Absolutely. I go into schools all of the time and do these types of talks. So really every school, it's different. They choose how to use me. Some schools, they'll choose to have me come out and do an assembly. And I'll come in and I'll speak to the sophomores or the freshmen and sophomores all at once. And I do a similar PowerPoint presentation. With the kids, I share a little bit more of my own personal story and what that was like being in high school. They can relate to that and some of the same feelings and how I got sober and what inspired me. And then I give them these informations, like all the THC education I was giving you. But some schools, they have funding where they'll have me come out and speak to the different health classes and the different age groups that are in the health classes and be a little bit more one-on-one with them. Some schools, they have funding where they have our staff on site at the school providing services so that if kids are getting in trouble, instead of being suspended, they get to have counseling with a drug and alcohol counselor. So yes, it just depends on the school, and I know your guys' school is trying to get me to come out and do talks to the kids in an assembly. This school right here. Oh, sorry, there's parents from other schools. Yes, Del Oro. And so even if you leave here tonight as a parent and you're going, hey, I want to find out what my school is doing, take one of my flyers and take it into your school and say, listen, I was here at this talk. Please, they can reach out to me and I'll give them all the information we do with schools, because I go into middle schools too. In Davis right now, I've done parent nights and assemblies there for the kids, and it's been amazing to get that early prevention happening in middle school.
And feel free to let administrators know you'd like that.
At back to school night, Principal Gallardo said that he thought that the vaping incidence here at Del Oro was about 30%. So I did ask my kids what they thought, And I was shocked. They thought it was much higher. They thought 70, 75%. My youngest is a sophomore, and she's increasingly wanting to take online-only classes because she doesn't want to be around it. And she goes in the bathroom, and it's happening all the time. So I'm just wondering what's going to be done about it here.
I'm going to let you take the lead on this, Nicole.
We know we have a problem, and we're doing our best to try and get on it. And it's not just happening in the bathrooms; it's happening in classrooms because there's no smoke, and so they just breathe it into their sweatshirt, or they do whatever. So we're talking about coming up with a vaping campaign. We're looking at different things with probably having our peer mentors next year be trained to do some peer education piece. We think a lot of times it's most well received from teenagers. They're definitely getting consequences in the office. There's also some sort of device for the bathroom that might be able to, he can answer that part.
Yeah, so one of the things that was interesting from the California Healthy Kids Survey, so one of the questions that was asked to our students was, what's the perceived harm? How dangerous do you think these different substances are? And it was interesting to see that the perceived harm of cigarettes was very high. It was in like the 85% of students said this is very, very dangerous. And the perceived harm of other substances were relatively low, including vaping. And so this is what the national campaign several years ago did, is it instructed our youth, cigarettes are really bad for you. And people think, yeah, those are bad and they're gross and we don't want to do them. We need to have that kind of same campaign with vaping now. And so we've gathered a group of leaders on campus, so far adult leaders, and we're incorporating students soon to try to come up with a campaign where we can instruct our students on some of the information that Amy's sharing tonight on the danger of this, some of the things that it leads to. And so right now, yes, we have a problem. And I think that probably 70% is high. I don't think that it's that high. But yes, it's a serious problem, and it's happening all the time, and it's hard to tackle because it's so easy to hide. But we're trying to collaborate with students and parents and community members to figure out how to best tackle the issue here.
And we are definitely having these sorts of conversations that Amy's talking about tonight with our students. We're definitely trying to do education around popcorn lung. I've talked to a lot of athletes about it when they'll tell me, well, I'm really stressed, I'm starting to do this, it seems pretty minimal. And I'm like, oh, sweetie, it's not minimal. Are you having trouble breathing? So we have a lot of conversations, but yes, we need to be more concentrated in approaching it.
Is the problem large enough in all of the high schools in the district that maybe the district office would entertain having these kind of presentations for the 8th graders, trying to head it off before they get to high school?
And the feeder schools definitely could be bringing Amy in, and all of our feeder schools were invited tonight, so this went out to all the PUHSD high schools and all of our feeder schools. So I think to some degree, it's also getting people to realize that this is such an epidemic and that the vaping is so dangerous.
Well, one of the things I want to add in, and I'll out myself as a parent as well, okay? So I commend all of you for coming here on a Thursday night after work, right? I'm sure everyone is exhausted. Like, this sweet baby has been so good during the whole 2 hours. It's awesome, right? But it's hard. And I'll tell you, when my child is having the schools reaching out and saying, oh, there's these different talks, if I'm being 100% honest, they had one on bullying, and it was in the evening. I'm tired, and what my first thought was? Oh, we don't need that. We're not dealing with that. Like, I don't need to go. And I didn't go. And you know what? Like, that's wrong. I should have been there. How do I know if we have that issue or not? Right? But as parents, we think, I don't need substance abuse. My kid's in 7th grade. We're not there. We're good. And I have 2 other kids. I got to get to soccer tonight, or this, and then dinner, and a project for this one, right? We're so overwhelmed. We should have this entire theater full, right? But this is a tough topic to reach everyone on, because you're absolutely right. We need to be starting at 6th grade, okay? Preparing our kids for going into middle school and even being exposed at that level with the vaping. But it gets to be this fear of, well, you know, I don't want that to be our story, and maybe thinking, well, it's just not, we just don't want to talk about it. So absolutely, it's, I think as parents getting involved, and then reaching out to administration and saying and asking for what we need, or how we can join in and help get more parents involved, whether it's PTA and bringing up this topic.
And part of this also with addressing that families are going 12 different directions is the filming that we're having. We did have, last year we had families ask, you know, will we be able to see it? We just can't be there. So we've begun to film the presentations. It will be on our website. It will be on the district mental health website. If you haven't seen our website, so if you look at the PUHSD website and type in mental health, you'll get a website that we've put together. There are 3 of us in the district that has all sorts of information on all sorts of mental health related issues, substance abuse related issues, lots of just different articles that we find useful, lots of links that we find useful. So that might be a good resource for people also.
I just remember, my kids are older now, but I remember them going to big functions where they would talk about this kind of stuff, and when they're around all their peers, it's kind of like they make a joke out of it, and they don't really take it seriously, and it's like, oh, right, you know, everything. And so I just think it's super important for, and I commend whoever has their kids here tonight, just to have the parents, I don't know if it should be a requirement that parents have to be, have to go through a program so that the parent and the child can be together, looking at this information together, so they know what we know what they know. You know, it's kind of like, they can't really argue anything with you anymore. It's like you're both hearing the facts together, and it's taken more seriously that way too, I think. I don't know, just my thought.
Absolutely.
No, great thought. And there is outside I have a table out there with just some resources on it. And on the right, there is another, at Placer, there's going to be a conversation in February specifically on vape, not the rest of addiction. So if you have family or friends that are like, wow, I wish I'd gone, it's not going to be the same talk, but it will be around vaping. So let people know, let family friends know that the video will be on our website, and maybe that's our way we can grow it a little bit.
So my daughter's a freshman at Placer, and I'm definitely going to have a conversation with administration because I'm friends with them. But just today, my daughter was asking me, she's a freshman in 14, can you OD on marijuana? And I'm a child of the 80s, and looking at your statistics from the 90s, I would tell you that's very accurate on the use of marijuana. And looking at the statistics today, that is beyond scary. And I'm an educated mom from a long time ago, and you're sharing information that is relevant. That this nice woman I met in the parking lot, we were laughing about what parents are going to be here tonight, and that many of the parents who should be here are probably not going to be here, and we were both shocked at how small the auditorium is. So because this is being recorded, I'm hoping that administration is going to be looking at this. And Amy, your talk is impeccable and invaluable, and I appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
I do have a quick question. It's probably a bigger question for what you can talk about, but my situation is my 14-year-old daughter is asking those questions. Can you OD on marijuana? Vaping's no big deal. So we had a big long conversation yesterday about, you know, back in the 50s, they used to promote smoking was a good idea, and then now they understand the consequence. And, you know, it scares me down the road what consequence your generation is going to see from vaping. But people that are older than her right now are making significantly poor choices in drug use and drinking and driving and getting in car accidents. And if you can quickly, how would you advise people who have young people who are looking at people who are 18, 19, 20, 21, because like you say, it's until you're 25, who are making those poor decisions. What kind of advice would you give in talking with them?
Now, that's a great question. And I would encourage you to have her take a look at what makes that a glamorized thing, right? Looking up to an older person, what about that is exciting or makes you feel grown up? A lot of times when you can connect the kid to, what is this about? I want to fit in. I want to feel cool. If you can be accepted by someone older that's doing this and taking you under their wing, right? That feels good. Most teenagers don't have a strong sense of self yet. They're still trying to figure things out and their self-esteem. And I'll tell you, first and foremost, for me as a teenager, when I discovered I could use marijuana, I no longer was afraid to talk to a boy. I didn't care what other people thought about me anymore. Now all of a sudden I had this courage, and I wasn't stressed out about these grades that I was falling behind on. I could feel at ease, but that's not a reality. So connecting her to her world, right? And this is a part of the undeveloped brain. So quickly it can get thrown off into all these other directions. But if you bring her back to her world right now, what she wants for her, in spite of what she sees these other people doing, because what they're never going to glamorize or talk about, how they felt the next day after being intoxicated, and then the emptiness afterwards. How it felt the next day when their parents were sitting them down and going, how did we get here? I need the keys to your car now. I can't trust you. You don't get a key to the house anymore. I can't have you here home alone. We need to take your door off the hinges to the room. I can't trust you. They're not glamorizing those things. You're not seeing those things. Any type of substance abuse, eventually, over a period of time, consequences have to come with it. That's really anything with instant gratification, if you think about it. You know, advertising for diets, lose 10 pounds in a week. Okay, come on. How realistic is that? And even if you're doing that, what lengths are you going to do it? And it's not sustainable. Anything that we turn to change the way we feel right now in this moment always ends up having some type of consequences. The question is, are you willing to pay the price? And at what lengths are you willing to keep that into your world? Who do you have to lie to make it work, right? If you're doing sport, I know for me with cheer, I had to lie. I had to keep this hidden. Those worlds did not go together. And the fact that I was willing to go to great lengths, the eye drops, the perfume, all these different things to hold it, that's not normal. That is addict-type behavior. And it's being glamorized and minimized and rationalized. So I would have conversations like that and really connecting her right now into her moment and what's important to her. And if she's feeling this need to want to be claimed by someone older, that's right, we all want that. We want to be claimed. We want to feel a part of. Bringing her back to, well, where are your friends right now in your group? The friends that have truly been friends, that have stood by your side, they encourage you to do good at your sports or your schooling. And if you say, no, I don't feel like doing that, they'll go, okay, right? It's really bringing back the value of healthy friendships.
Another piece to add to that, when I'm talking to students, they'll say that piece, I'm able to talk to people. I had a young man, a freshman, say the other day, I'm not the dork that nobody wants to be friends with anymore. And so it's the piece of, okay, so why are you, I really non-judgmentally, I'll be like, so why do you use? Like, what does it do for you? And when they're like, really, you're not gonna like judge me? Then they're like, well, I can talk to people, I feel better, I'm not so anxious, all the things you just said. And so then the next question is, so how do we get you there without the substance? Like, you're choosing this easy piece, right? Like, it's so easy to pick that up and put that in your mouth. What else could you do? And if they knew how to do it, they'd do it, right? So I can't just say, well, go make friends, because they're like, well, yeah, I'm ineffective at that.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so let's do the baby steps. Like, I think this generation, we think they're so mature, and if you've read any of Twenge work, Twenge, she's the woman who's done a lot of research on how smartphones are just decimating their ability to function. They don't know how to problem solve. They Google things. So they're not actually figuring out the answer, they just find something and they plug it in. It's like, it's A. And you're like, oh, actually, it's not A, it's B. And so it's like, okay, think through the process. If it's really hard to talk to people, what could you say? How do you start conversations with people? If they have a t-shirt on with music on it, could you ask them about that band? If they hang with these people and those people like anime, maybe talk to them about anime. But they need baby step help, because sometimes just go make a friend is just way too much. If they knew how to do that, they'd do it. Or if they knew how to soothe themselves when they're anxious, they'd do it. So it's like we've got to back them up and make little, do you know how to breathe when you're really anxious? What do you do to calm down? I saw a hand up here.
Sorry, I didn't get the spelling of the author.
Twenge. And she has a whole book on it, and I'm pretty, there's a TED Talk at this point, and it's really about all the addiction related to screen time. We also showed earlier this year Screenagers. So if you can get on their website, it's called Screenagers, like teenagers, but Screenagers. They have like Tech Talk Tuesday and all sorts of information based on the dopamine. It's the same addiction process, triggers dopamine, triggers all that good stuff, but on screens. So. All right, at 7:30, we want to honor everybody's time. We will be here for a few minutes if anybody wants to ask us questions or you guys questions. There's information out front. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having us.